Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the writer of the upcoming Folklords at Boom Studios and the cartoonist of Mind Management in Department H. It's Matt Kindt. Thanks for coming on, Matt.
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me.
So, we're going to talk a lot about Folklords and some of your other work, but when I was doing my research, I was looking at your background, and you have a lot of different things that are very interesting to me, not the least of which is the fact you design for the sporting news. I'm not going to get into that but I just want to mention that because I love it. But I want to start where you started with making comics, seemingly. You were making your own copy shop zines when you were 17. Well, what was the story behind that? Was that when you first started making comics, or was that just kind of when you started formalizing the process in a way?
Yeah, honestly, I keep thinking about like the first comics I made. And I think the first thing I ever did on my own was just an adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe, Pit and the Pendulum. Mm-hmm. And I took all of the text. This is back in 1989, maybe 88, 89. And I took all the text, typed it into a computer. I can't even remember what computer. It might have been it couldn't have been a Commodore or Amiga, one of those. I don't know which computer. And then I printed out all the text on a dot matrix printer, and then I copied and pasted it into the layouts. And I had done like these illustrations. It was like a 20-page comic with illustrations, and then the text was sort of pasted in there. And so that was my first comic book, even though it was kind of just like an illustrated story with, I don't know, it was kind of a weird, I didn't know what I was doing. Basically, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I loved comics. And that came out, and I worked at like the regular comic book page size and everything, so it was big, but I never reproduced it. It was only just like I guess it was like an exercise for me to figure out how to draw at that size and put like a narrative together with pictures and words. And but yeah, the first comic book I actually did, trying to think, I guess when I got to college, like 92, 93, I started doing mini comics, and that was like just photocopied stuff, and stapled, and then I would run around to comic shops and drop them off and on consignment, and then I would never go back to see if they sold because I just didn't want to know. I was afraid they hadn't sold, so I just didn't go back. I was like, the part I liked about it was making it and putting it out there, and then the rest of that is just, it didn't really matter at the time.
Yeah, it's funny. There's this shop in Ireland, Big Bang Comics, and I know that they often have, like, one of the guys who works there will put it on Twitter. He's just like, everyone who, makes comics and puts them on consignment here, we love that you do that, but don't forget to come back and get your money. We want to pay you. And I wonder if that's part of the reason. It's just like, to a certain degree, it's like, you just want to feel like you did it. Like, you don't want to know whether or not there were results, because results is like something real or something. I don't know. It's interesting.
Well, and honestly, like that $5 or $10 isn't going to make it worth it. It wasn't worth the effort for that $10. But yeah, I had a funny story. A few years ago, I was doing a signing in Chicago at Chicago Comics. I hadn't been there forever. And but that was one of the shops when I went up to a convention one time. I dropped off my mini comics there, and then I just never went back. And I was at a signing. Now as a grown up, and the guy was like, "Hey, guess what I found down in the basement or whatever?" They had a ton of like old zines and comics and stuff from back in the day that they just stored, and he had one of those minis that I dropped off.
That's amazing.
So I actually signed it, but then that answered my question of whether they sold or not, because it didn't sell. But I think it was worth more now. Like, I was like, you could sell that now, I bet.
Yeah.
Because there's like a handful of them out in the world.
If only there was a Wizard magazine, then you could have like first Matt Kindt on that, and it would dramatically increase the value. But
yeah, right. I have a big box of them at home, and I'm hoping that they can be my retirement plan. I'll just sell them all one by one when I get old.
So you were talking about college. So you went to Webster University for an art degree. Now, near as I can tell, like I couldn't find exactly what you studied, but it seemed like it was more kind of like on the fine art side. Like, what did you originally want to do with your art? Did you have like designs on where you were going to go from there, or was it always comics?
Yeah, no, it was always comics. I took some writing classes and was doing the fine art just because I wanted to learn how to draw and paint and take tons of figure drawing classes and uh, and so I wanted to know all of the art. I want to know all of it, and I love art history and but yeah, the whole idea was I was always just going to take whatever I learned and apply it to comics. Um, and in art school at that time, especially, comics was not a mainstream. Not that it's still, I don't know if it's mainstream now, but I think it's more of an accepted medium because
Hmm.
people know about it just from the movies and everything. But at the time, it was not. It was like in all the teachers I had, I just didn't say anything about it. I was like, I'm here to learn painting. I'm here to learn drawing.
Yeah.
Like, never mind. There was always the question of like, oh, what are you going to do? Or I just wouldn't say. It's like I felt like at the time it was a look down upon career path, and especially in fine art. And
Yeah.
so I just sort of kept it to myself. I would do comics at home and on the side, and uh, I think like we had to give a big presentation when we graduated, where you show all of your art and you talk about it, and you have to write up like an essay about like your um, I don't know, your artistic mission or whatever. So the thing I wrote up, I actually made into a comic book and handed out like as part of the presentation. But that was as close as I ever got to exposing what I really wanted to do there.
Yeah. I do think that stuff, like having that kind of background, maybe not doing it specifically for sequential art, can be really interesting because I don't remember who I was talking to. I had an artist on, and we were talking about how, having like, it's kind of like if you have like more diverse food that's coming in, it's like you'll have a more balanced diet. And it's like for artists, having a more, uh, diverse background in terms of the art you're engaging with and the art that you actually like enjoy can sometimes lead to more interesting work. Because like I know that from what I understand that you were really into like 1940s illustrations and more like painterly work, and I feel like magazine illustrators is like secretly like one of the like from a comic fan standpoint, no one would guess that like somebody like JC Leyendecker is like a massive influence on everybody seemingly, yet he is. And it's funny, like, how do you feel that experience in college like influenced your art going forward?
Yeah, honestly, I feel like it. I feel like rather than just like a particular art style, I think what I learned most was like how to think about art, and then you look at all of art through all of art history, and you have your favorite artists. But the thing, and I don't think I realized it at the time, was it's helped me think about what's the purpose of it, and just sort of think outside the box. And I think that was maybe the biggest thing I learned in school was that. And I remember we had to take this class. Uh, it was called Foundations, and then they walk you through all these different art forms, and then there was a whole section on performance art, which I absolutely hated. I was like, this is totally useless. Like there's no application at all to this in anything I want to do going forward. And I just, uh, I tolerated it, but I was like, this is the worst. Wasting my time. I'm like, I think I did question. I was like, what am I doing in here? But then later, as I got older and I started doing comics, and I started realizing like, uh, I started applying that thinking to comics, and like you go to the comic shop and all the comics are the same size and all the covers kind of look the same, and it's just like everything just sort of like blends together. And I think taking a class like that performance art and 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 learning about modern art and like how it's not about necessarily like what I thought about when I was in high school, which is the more realistic it looks, the better it is. The older I got, the more I realized, well, it's the idea. What's the idea behind it? And so I feel like I was able to apply that to comics, like the design of the comic, the look of the comic, the paper, the logo, all of that stuff. is a performance, you know. And then the other part of comics that I didn't really enjoy was going to conventions and like signing books and having that interaction with strangers and everything. And and then I started to realize, well, it's only because everybody kind of does the same thing, and you sit there and somebody comes up and you have this sort of the same conversation over and over again. And I thought, well, this is where the performance art can come in. Why can't we make that more interesting? You know, why can't, and it gave me an idea to make a book where I cut a piece of it out and glue it in and draw on it. And another book that I just burn one of the pages out of, you know, while you're standing there. And I think those sort of weird ideas that all of those tie into the story of the book. It's not just a thing to do. But I think all that just came from that dumb performance art class where it's like, why not make every part of the experience, a piece of the story or something different, you know, and just try to shake it up.
Yeah. That's one of the things that I kept like thinking about when I was reading other interviews with you, where it just kind of seems like what kind of helps create a project for you often stems from just like random interests or like curiosities and things like that. Like, you know, I was reading about how like Department H, like you were reading and like watching like films and documentaries about like underwater exploration. But another one that I thought was really interesting was like, so you and Brian Hurt did Poppy and the Lost Lagoon, and that seemingly stemmed from you guys doing like some improvisational commissions at a convention, and you guys kind of discovered a style that worked really well for that, where he was doing like really loose line art and you were doing watercolors over it. I just think that's really interesting that it seems like, I don't know. It seems like your projects can kind of come from anywhere. Like, you know, for example, we're going to talk about Folklords. Folklords started as a title. And I don't know. It seems like a lot of times when people are trying to create a story, they start with like, you know, they're actually thinking about the story. And it just kind of seems like yours come from damn near anywhere.
Yeah, no, I think you got to be, at least for me, I'm always open. My ears are always open. My eyes are always open to ideas, you know, and they come from everywhere all the time. And that's, I feel like I'm a collector of ideas. Like I have, you know, I used to say like, oh, I got like 10 ideas I'm never going to get to. I'm like, well, now I got folders and folders full of ideas that I'll never get to, you know, and it's just like to me, that's the fun. The coming up with the idea is the fun part, you know, and everything else is different ways of executing, and it's a different kind of fun.
You know, one of the things I thought was really interesting that you did was that you did the mind management read-along record. And it seems like, I don't know, would you say that sometimes when you are kind of coming up with projects that in a way it's like you're trying to challenge yourself to learn new things? Because, I mean, I have to imagine you had to learn a lot to kind of put that whole thing together. Although you did work with Clint McElroy, which I'm sure helped quite a bit.
Yeah, no, that was great. He was really he was the spark that made the thing happen, because I'd been wanting to do like a read-along record forever. And then I got introduced to him, and he was a big fan of mind management. So just everything fell into place. It was an idea I'd had that I thought I'd never get to. And then a thing happens like that where you meet a guy and then it just all happens. It all falls together. Yeah, I think I get bored. I get bored of doing the same thing over and over again. I don't like, if I have to redraw a page or rewrite a thing, it's probably the thing I like least. Mm-hmm. You know, I don't like redoing it. And I also just get bored doing the same kind of thing. Like, honestly, writing like a 22-page comic, that format and everything, it's hard for me to just keep doing it, because eventually if you do a thing long enough, you start to fall into these rhythms and like this way of doing a thing where it's just comfortable, and you kind of figure it out, like whatever that puzzle is, you figure it out, and then it's so boring. And I feel like I figure out a way to do a thing, and then it's like, well, now I don't want to do that anymore. Let's figure out a different way to do it, or like a different format, or like, how can we break that, or how can I make it harder on myself, you know, or what can we add, or what, you know, what's going to be on the back cover? How can we use the page edges? How can we do something different? You know, I feel like I've been doing it like 20 years, and I just don't want to ever be bored. And so to not be bored, I just have to figure out new ways to do it.
Yeah. Do you feel like you have to like regularly try to find new ways to like kind of challenge yourself and like new ways to approach stories? Because you know that ties into Folklords. Like Folklords seems like its roots were again in the name, but also trying to find a way to get Matt Smith to work with you. And like, not that Matt wasn't, but it's like you wanted to find the right stories. So it was almost like you had to keep pushing yourself to find the right story that would attract him. Like, is that rooted in the same place as like the not being bored, like trying to find a challenge for yourself and for your collaborators?
Yeah, it is. And like, I think when I started in comics, I was doing like spy stuff and World War II and um and then crime and detective things. And then uh, I felt like I was just in that. That's sort of the genre I was inhabiting. And after a while, I was like, oh, I never really did do superheroes. I grew up reading superhero books, never done them. So I wanted to do those for a while, um, and then, so I think one of the ways that keeps me interested is to just jump from genre to genre and try new ones that I haven't tried before. Like I want to do a romance comic, I want to do a horror book. I hadn't really done any fantasy stuff, and but then when I think Twin Peaks season 3 had come out, and Lemire had sent me, or no, I was at Lemire's studio, and he had this print on the wall, and it was like all the Twin Peaks characters drawn, and it was by Matt Smith. And I was like, who did that? It was like the greatest thing. It was like all the characters just on one big poster. So then I emailed Matt, and I was like, hey, do you have any of those left? I need one so bad. And then we just emailed back and forth a few times, and he just sent me one of those prints. And then and it just happened that I was working with Boom, and I did a Planet of the Apes thing, and he was going to be able to draw it. And I was like, man, I really want to work with this guy.
Yeah.
And then so that that idea came from like, well, what does he want to do? Like, and hopefully it's something we both want to do. And he didn't really have a specific thing, but he didn't want to draw like everyday stuff. Like probably the last thing he wanted to draw was like a couple of detectives driving around solving a crime. He wanted to do something crazier. So I gave him one pitch, and he was like, "Meh." He didn't say that to me. He went through the editor, and I was like, "Well, maybe he just doesn't. Maybe I'm just irritating him, And the editor was like, "No, no, no. He just wants to draw something more fantastical, or something more fun to draw." And that first pitch, I thought it had some stuff, but it was definitely grounded in like a modern day city with weird stuff in it. So I was like, oh, okay. So then, and that's when the editor was like, yeah, I got it. He's like, I have an idea. I have a title, no story. Like, what's the title? Because to me, those are like writing prompts. It's just like improv where you're shouting out things to the improv actors, and then they're doing whatever. I was like, I love that, because sometimes it does spark a thing. So he said Folklords. I was like, well, that's a great title. It needs a book. And so yeah, so I came up with the idea, and I was like, well, this is crazy, and this is something that Matt might like to draw. There's only one normal looking person in it, and which is kind of the hook. And I think in a way that became kind of the joke for me was he wanted to draw something more fun and fantastical, but the main character wears a suit and tie, and I think that was, in a way, it was like a little bit of a joke from me to him. It was like, here, draw all this crazy stuff, but the main guy's going to be a suit and tie guy.
Yeah, no, God, it kind of reminds me, there's this anime that I really love. It's called The Boy and the Beast. And it's oh my God, it's Mamoru Hosoda. And it's like, it starts in like the real world, and then it moves in like this kid, this young boy or young man goes into a fantastical world where it's just all beasts. And he's like, relative to them, he is kind of like the beast. He's like the one that's atypical to the world. But I like that, I don't know. The first thing I ever read Matt in was Lake of Fire that he did with Nathan Fairbairn.
Yeah.
And he was just incredible in it. And it is kind of funny because, like, in a lot of ways, that has a lot of ordinary real world stuff in it, and then all of a sudden it's like aliens,
Yeah.
and and so it seems like, you maybe found the right itch to scratch with Matt, where he likes the fantastical, but with like a slight blend of reality in there.
Yeah.
So you saw that Twin Peaks poster. What is it? I really love the fact that he's like a true cartoonist. Like his style has like, it's beautiful cartooning, but everything he does has like so much weight and impact to it. What was it that just appealed to you so much about Matt's art?
Here's the thing is, and I think a lot of, and this is the kiss of death, but to call somebody but he's an artist,
Yeah.
and other artists recognize it right away, and it's like all of my artist friends I've talked to, and like about this book, they're like, "Oh, you're getting to work with Matt?" Like they're jealous, and it's because other artists can see in his work what not everybody has, and it's just a storytelling, a sense of storytelling, and then just the weight of his characters and the design of the characters that not everybody has. It's just and I compared him to Alex Toth online, and I think I embarrassed him on Twitter. But I was like, look, dude, it's the same. Except because of the line weight and the way he spots the blacks and the storytelling and like the economy of line and all the stuff that, like, if you study art and art, it leaps off the page. You recognize it right away, and he's just one of those guys that is that.
Mm-hmm. I always love that there's like the artists. It's like the bands that like the bands listen to, because
yeah, right. And it's a kiss of death though, because that means they're not going to sell as many or be as popular. But Matt's going to be different.
Yeah, no, I honestly agree, because it's just, I don't know. There's something about him. But another one that always would come up. I used to do this thing at Multiversity Comics. It was called Artist August, where I would spend the entire month interviewing artists, and I'd always talk about like who's the artist that you kind of like wish more people talked about, kind of in a way like the artist. And like the number one person that was mentioned was Jorge Zafino. And it was funny because I had never heard of Zafino before, which I guess in some ways was kind of fitting given the fact that it was like the one that they wished that more people talked about. But yeah, it is interesting. That is like a odd designation, because it's like this one which basically means that everyone that's an artist loves you, but for some reason other people haven't figured it out yet. I don't know. His Matt's style though is like, it's just really like, he's such a good storyteller, and it's so like obviously appealing. Like my wife saw Lake of Fire and she was just like, this is amazing. And I was just like, yeah, I know, it's incredible.
Yeah, no, he's good. And I didn't really realize, it's funny because I didn't know who to compare him to. And if you'd asked me this like a couple weeks ago, I was like, well, I don't really know. But then I saw Folklords 1, just the black and white, like I saw the inks and letters, and I was looking at it and I was like, well, it's Alex Toth and Jeff Smith, like the way he spots the blacks and the way he uses the lines and everything. I was like, this is, it's just amazing. Like his stuff works so well in black and white. You don't even need the color. Like the color looks great too. I've seen it and it's great, but for somebody's art to work just as good in black and white, like I want to see two versions of the book come out, because I think it's just like Bone. I love Bone, and maybe it's just because I read it all in black and white first, but I prefer the black and white because I think you can see the lines better. You can just see the hand on the page, and so I prefer it. But I think that might be another artist thing.
Oh no, I have the single issues, and I have like the 1 volume edition and like a bunch of the trades for Bone. And then I also started getting the colored ones because I was just like, I want to see what it looks like in color. And I don't know, I appreciate it, but at the same time, it's just, it feels wrong in a weird way. Like it's not, I mean, it's obviously not wrong. Like Jeff Smith was involved with like doing all of that, but at the same time, it's just, it wasn't the way that I engaged with it first. So it just totally threw me off. Well, I do want to talk about like, what the book is all about. So for listeners that don't know, Folklords is Matt's new series with artist Matt Smith, who we've complimented quite a bit, colorist Chris O'Halloran, who is also awesome, and letterer Jim Campbell, who letters like so many amazing books. Here's the solicit. From Narnia to Harry Potter, we've seen our hero leave the real world for a fantasy world, but in Ansel's world of monsters magic, he's haunted by visions of our world with tailored suits and modern technology. Ansel embarks on his quest to find the mysterious Folklords, hoping they can explain his visions, but looking for the Folklords is punishable by death. What will Ansel risk to find out what the world he has never truly belonged in? It's so... I do want
that
to...
sounds really good. I did not write that part.
I did want to ask about like the process, because you started with a name that somebody else came up with. What was, I guess, what is the process for like effectively reverse engineering a project? Because it seems like you start with a name, you go backwards. Like, how did you develop this book?
I just sat down and wrote like a 10 or 12 page pitch. And I just outlined the whole thing and had all the characters. It's just like I do most every other story I've done, is I just come up with the characters and the plot and put a pitch together and send it to them. Mm-hmm. So it's not like
completely
it
different.
Wasn't like the process was any different, and what's funny is like everyone always, they're like, oh, where your ideas come from? And most creators or writers they're always like, well, it's really hard to, there's no easy answer. And I was like, well, I think almost every book I've ever done, I could tell you exactly where the idea came from, because it is like not everything, not all of the plot and not all of the characters, but the kernel of the idea always comes from somewhere, or there's a spark that sparked that thing, and then you develop it. But and every book I've done has been some different way,
Yeah.
And but yeah, I think when I heard that title, I was like, oh, that sounds like some mystery people you would go find, and who would you go find, and then what would that be? And I don't want to write a fantasy book. I don't like fantasy as a rule, as a genre. So I was like, well, what could I do with that, or what would I do? And so in a lot of ways, the kid in the suit and tie that's out of place in this fantasy world is kind of a stand-in for my attitude towards fantasy. Mm-hmm. It's like, I'm here begrudgingly, and but at the same time, and I say this all the time, everybody in the studio makes fun of me because I'm like, I hate musicals, but yeah, I loved, but I love sound and music, and it's like, oh, I hate Broadway shows or whatever, but then I saw Hamilton, and I loved it, and then everything I hate, there's an exception to it.
Yeah.
So, and fantasy is the same way. Like I read Lord of the Rings when I was in high school, and I loved that, and I love Conan the Barbarian of all things, and that, which doesn't make any sense with anything I like. Like it literally doesn't go with anything else I like. Uh-huh. So I do. There are exceptions to my rule of or to the list of things I hate, which is funny. Brian, my studio mate, has a running list of all of the weird things I hate. And I'm not going to tell you what's on there, but maybe get him on. He'll tell you. It's a weird list.
Oh, I think everybody's got their weird list of stuff, but I do think, bringing up Brian, I read that one of the things that he hates is quests. Like he just thinks the idea of quests is like stupid.
Oh, yeah, that's where this idea came from. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I just thought it was funny that like Brian was just like, I hate quests. They're stupid. Why do they always have them? And then you're like, I'm gonna make a book where society always has quests at a certain age. And I was just like,
I feel like sometimes my ideas come from teasing other people that I know. They're like, oh yeah, you think that won't work? Well, let's do it times 1,000, and then I'll show you. Yeah, I know. I was trying to work on like a Conan style book with Brian last year, and it's sometimes it's easy for us to come up with something, and sometimes it's like he doesn't like anything I do, and so I have to just keep like spinning things out, and then one of the ideas, he's like, every fantasy story has a quest. Everybody's going on a quest. There's always he's like, I'm going to do something that isn't that. And what's funny is like, that's a great note. I totally agree with it, because it's always a quest. There's always the thing they got to get, or the place they got to go. And I thought that was a great note. So I was like, oh, we'll figure it out. So I'm still working on that other thing with Brian.
Hmm.
Um, but then I was working on this at the same time. I was like, oh, this totally lends itself to that quest thing, and then I had his note in the back of my head. I'm like, yeah, and he's right about it. And I was like, yeah, but that's what's funny is like because there's a quest. Every story has a quest. Well, this could be like the explanation for it. You know, like when you turn 18, it's your coming of age. Everybody goes on one. You know, it's just like getting your driver's license, except you have to go on your quest.
Yeah. I think the funny thing about quests though is, in a weird way, it's kind of just like, I mean, isn't that what like warriors and like knights and stuff? Like, I guess I'm saying it's what they do, but at the same time, I guess that is kind of fitting into like his point. It's like, why are there always quests? But I mean, it's like quests are kind of just the story for a knight. It's just like that's what their life is. It's like me going to my day job, but their day job is like going to fight a dragon.
Yeah, right, right.
I guess this is
Yeah,
why fantasy
exactly.
is weird.
Well, that's what like every Conan story. What is it? It's like him trying to get somewhere, or gets roped into something, or has to find a thing, or kill a thing. But it's really that's what's funny is like that note about quests is like, well, that's you're just talking about a plot. Like every story has a quest. Every single story on Earth has a has
Yeah.
some kind of quest. Like you're either trying to solve the mystery, or trying to get the thing, or get away from a guy, or get to a place. Like that's just plot, you know. And I think the more you read stories or write stories, the more you kind of maybe push against that idea of plot,
Hmm.
uh, just because it does put all these constraints on you, and you have to have these certain story beats, and I get it, and because I push against those all the time. Like I don't I hate ending a issue of a comic, a 22-page comic with like a splash page and like somebody's in danger.
Yeah.
It's like, ugh, that's my least favorite way to end an issue, you know. And so how can you get around that? And but yeah, so the note's coming from a good place, and I just thought it would be funny.
It is super funny. I love it. I don't know. Now I'm thinking about like just replacing other words with quests. It's like how different would James Bond movies be if instead of missions he went on quests?
Yeah, right.
It sounds way weirder.
Yeah, it's just an old-fashioned way of saying you're going on your mission.
Yeah, exactly. John McClane went into Nakatomi Plaza on a quest.
Yeah.
Uh, well, I do want to, what you were just saying ties into something I want to talk about. I love the covers for the mind management omnibuses that you're doing. Like they have like a kind of textbook like design in case people that don't know them. It's kind of like the field guides and everything. But do you find that whenever you kind of get into situations where there's kind of like an accepted way, not universally, I'm not saying that you're like a universal contrarian or something, but you like to kind of push back against what the norm is because, I don't know, sometimes doing the norm is a good way to not stand out.
Yeah, I do. Honestly, when I do covers or I'm designing a thing, I'm not thinking about just the book or what the story is inside. You have to think about the context of where that book is going to be, you know. And if you go to a comic shop, there's 100 comics on the shelf. So how do you stand out from that? You know, like what's the difference between yours and every other one? I think so. If you're willing to take a risk on a cover or a design of a book, um, it helps you stand out, not just superficially, because I think the stuff inside is different, you know, and so it should look different. And I've gotten pushed back a lot of times on a lot of the things I've designed, including those mind management covers that nobody liked that idea, but me and
And
my
me.
wife. Yeah, and you and that's why I was like you guys are wrong. Like it doesn't people don't want to see like a whatever the other thing was, you know, and we kind of already did that for 36 issues. We had weird covers and painted and and so I really had to fight for that, and then I kind of doubted it myself. I was like, oh, maybe they're right. It's going to look like a boring textbook, and people won't pick it up. But I think that's by by its I always doubt myself. But at the end of the day, I was like, no, this is right. I'm sticking by it. It has to be this thing, you know. Um, and that happens a lot especially with covers. I think um, I'm a little more sensitive to it just because I was a designer. Like when I got out of school, I was a graphic designer for I don't know how many years, 95 to 6 or 7 years probably as a graphic designer. And so I've designed all my books, and I don't really want to be told what to do
Right.
when it comes to that, because I know the material better than anybody. And I've had more design experience probably than any of the in-house designers that are going to be working on these books. And so I just don't, and I'm old enough now where I just don't care. I was like, this is the way it's going to be. And I have just enough confidence that I can do it, and enough experience where they let me at this point. But
Yeah, I think that, not obviously not saying anything against the Dark Horse editors who kind of weren't sure about those covers, but I do think that comics have this really weird love-hate relationship with the idea of different. And it's really funny because it's like when you think about a lot of the comics that really stand out throughout history, it's like they always did something like a little bit different. Like probably two of the biggest hits in the last 30 years in comics were black and white in an industry where it's basically believed that black and white doesn't sell. And
yeah,
in Bone and the Walking Dead. And then you talk about like covers, it's like probably the hottest name in like monthly comics right now is Jonathan Hickman. And he's like making X-Men comics in which like a third of them are data pages. And it's like, in his covers, for a lot of his books, like the Manhattan Projects and East of West and stuff, have a heavy like graphic design influence. And I just think that I don't know. I always find comics to be a really interesting thing because it was always, in a weird way, kind of like a counterculture, like you do its own thing type industry. But in a lot of ways, it can end up with a lot of stuff that is homogenous when it really doesn't need to be. And like that's not me disparaging other comics, but I don't know. I guess I'm in support of doing something different is what I'm saying.
yeah, no, I think every industry is like that. You get a lot of people doing something, and even if we are kind of an outlier as far as a medium goes, and we're sort of the weird art form, even within that, you get people start to just unconsciously mimic each other or do similar things or do it a certain way because that's the way you do it, and that's honestly, I find myself, that's when I start feeling that way, like, oh, that script was really easy, then I start to question. That's what makes me suspicious. I was like, oh, okay, it's because I've been doing it the way I've been doing it all the time, and so if it's not taking me longer to do it, or if it's not hard, then I'm always suspicious of the process.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean it doesn't have to take a lot of time. Like some of the covers I do, like I do them in like God, what cover was it? There was a cover for Mind Management where I think I drew and redrew it for 2 days in a row. And then I was like, this isn't working. And then I had a different idea, and it took me an hour and a half, and it was done. And it was, God, I'm trying to remember which cover it was. I'd have to go back and look at them.
But that's just how it works sometimes.
But yeah, so it is. Yeah, it's not like you have to grind and put a ton of time in. It's more about just like think about it a different way, and do something in a different way. And I think you can apply that. That applies to covers. It applies to the storytelling. It applies to the art inside. All of it.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like, so another thing that I think is interesting about your career is when you started, you were doing like graphic novels kind of roughly like once a year. And then you did Mind Management, which was like a longer, like monthly format comic. And then you were also like at about that point, you like shortly into Mind Management, you started like writing, like you did like the Frankenstein Agents of Shade, I want to say it was. And,
yeah.
You did some Valiant stuff. And now it kind of seems like you're a little bit like kind of tightening back up a little bit. Do you find that you like to kind of experiment with like approaches and like the types of formats you're doing and things like that at all to figure out what works, or is that just kind of how it worked out?
Yeah, no, I get bored. I get restless.
Yeah.
I don't want to do, I just don't want to keep doing the same thing, and that I think with Valiant, I'd done some DC and some Marvel stuff here or there, but I hadn't done a ton of it. And then with Valiant, I ended up getting a ton of writing work, and even within that, so the confines of that are 22 pages, traditional comic every month, and even within that, I was trying to figure out different ways to do things, and a lot of it was just the more you do, the more bored I got, and then the more I tried different things, and it's to keep it interesting for me, so I wouldn't get bored. But then as soon as I get bored, then I stop doing it. So I sort of turned off a lot of the Valiant stuff, and then I was doing, what am I doing? I did Department H, which was kind of fun. It was a little different. It was similar to Mind Management with the monthly comic, writing and drawing, but having my wife paint it, which I was like, well, that'd be great because it's just a different process then, like I had to finish everything a little bit sooner, and then I had to actually verbalize the story and my thought about the art to her, so she could sort of bounce things back off of me, and with color, and then how we're going to operate, how we're going to work, and like, do I change my line weight? Like a lot of extra cool things that I hadn't had to think about, and so that was fun, and that's what I'm finding now. Like this new phase or whatever is like collaborating. I'm learning to have fun with that and trying to figure out how to be better at it. And I think when you collaborate, it automatically gives you that extra, like, oh, it's going to be different. It might be harder. It's going to be a different process. And I think that keeps me excited and keeps me nervous. Like I feel like if I'm not nervous during the process and when the book's done, if I'm not worried about if it's good or not, or if I don't have that anxiety, then I'm not really happy. I feel like, oh, well, I just did a thing on autopilot and it came out, and I know it's going to be fine. But if I'm nervous about it, then that means that there's something in that book that I haven't done before. There's something different about it, and I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
So I don't think I thrive on it, but I think that to me is a sign that, like, okay, well, at least I'm not just cranking it out just to crank it out. I'm not just trying to hit deadlines.
Mm-hmm. So it's like when you get to the point where it just kind of feels like normal, that's kind of like when you're like, time to spice it up a little bit.
Yeah. That's when the alarm bells go off. Like, hey, I'm getting comfortable. This isn't right.
Well, speaking of collaboration, I do want to ask a couple questions about HEK Studio, or HEK Studio, the one that you're doing with Brian Hurt and Marie Enger. And you guys just did a Kickstarter, but part of it was because you wanted to open your doors to the community eventually, like, in quoting from the Kickstarter, creating a shared creative space for visiting writers and artists, and that will eventually host boutique comic book creation workshops that will be open to the public. I think that's awesome. Like, I love like the weird scenes that kind of pop up in cities and around the state or around the world. Like tonight, I live in Anchorage, Alaska. I'm going to go to a zine and artist meetup at this coffee shop, even though I am not a zine person or an artist at all, but just because I'm like interested in the culture and because I was invited and it just seems fun. Why was that something you all want to do with your studio, like sharing it with everybody else?
Yeah, I think we all have our own weird reasons that all sort of, so I can't speak for the others, but I always felt like the inspiration for this for me was like McSweeney's and what he's doing with like the writer workshops and that kind of thing. And then every time we drive to Heroes, we go through, God, where is it? Is it, but Third Man Records, Jack White's got like a little shop where he's got all his records, and then he has a recording studio there, and we run into there, and he's got, and he does activities and stuff there. And I was like, well, that's what I kind of want to do, that like for comics. There isn't, at least in the Midwest, there isn't really anything quite like that, where if you're driving through, you could drop in, you could buy some books, or you could sign up for a class, or you could, we have weird events. And we bought this building this year and fixed it up. It's like it was an old Route 66 garage. Mm-hmm. So now we have storage areas so we can print books, and we have like a kitchen, and then we have like a big open area so we could have like an art show, or we could have classes. And I used to teach kids, like back in the day before I was doing comics full time, I would teach like comic book classes to kids, and it was, teaching's hard. I can't say that I enjoy teaching, but but I felt like it was important, and it got kids excited, and so I think that's worth doing, and then we have extra space here for visiting artists. So if they want to come in, there's a place for them to stay and they can work. And so we kind of want to slowly start getting that going and just make more of a community out of it.
Yeah. I always like seeing the studios around the country whenever like they have visiting artists and stuff like that, because it feels like a team up. It's like superhero comics.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah, right.
Yeah, it's like, oh, somebody's visiting Helioscope Studios in Portland. This is really cool. Or like they're visiting 10 Star in Chicago. It's just there's always really fun things when that happens. But I do want to ask about your story in the HEK Treasury, just because I feel like this might be peak anti-boredom for you, just based off some of the stuff I read. So you're doing the Great Mech Wars, which is a mech story. But the thing is from what I understand, it has a big fold-out section that has a diagram of battle damage mech with a cutaway view and a narrative story that you read as diagram labels, as well as what you said was a kind of legacy storytelling element, which involves stickers and you kind of remixing the story yourself, which is just freaking wild. I was like reading about it and I was just like, I can't wait to figure out how this works. This is going to be amazing. So how did that come up? I mean, was that just, because this is like your own baby. You can do whatever you want, I guess, in any of your comics, but this feels like the apex of that. Like, why did you want to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I try to think of the most unmarketable, least commercial thing that no publisher would do. So, and we put it all in one book. But not really. I will say, like, every publisher, Dark Horse has been fantastic. Boom is great. Like, I have no complaints about any of the publishers I've worked with. They've all been open to a lot of crazy ideas and book cover design and all that stuff. Like, they at the end of the day, they always support whatever I want to do. So I can't say that I am doing this because no one will let me do it, but I think I will, because my publishers are so good at accommodating me. I was like, this book, it needs to be something that they wouldn't do. It's like, what wouldn't they do? And so I don't think they would do. We're gonna have like a couple big fold outs. They're like trifold. They fold out all like 3 times. So it's just like a big image, double sided, and then and I think again, it's like anything where the original idea, this came from something Brian and I have been talking about forever, was like doing like a heavy metal comic or a heavy metal magazine, or just doing some like crazy sci-fi where we can just do short stories and just kind of experiment with style and storytelling and so it started there and it just blew up. So it's like, well, we don't want to do a magazine. Let's do a big hardcover. Let's have gilded edges. And then let's do fold out pages. And then what are we going to do with that? And I want to do cross sections because I love them. But then I've been playing a lot of board games. And then we played this game, Pandemic. I don't know if you're into board games at all, but
I have Pandemic.
Yeah, so there's a Pandemic Legacy, which is like you play the game, and then as you play it, you open up boxes and you put stickers on things, and it changes the game. Like the rules change, and then all these surprises happen. And it's kind of like a narrative. It's telling a story that you're like actively involved in, And so we played like 2 or 3 weeks worth of that game, and then I was working on this story, one of these mech stories, and I was like, well, this is cool, but and I was like, well, what if the story is just told straight up conventionally, but then there's stickers in the back, and then you modify some of the captions, and you add like another point of view. So you're gonna layer in another point of view with the captions and the word balloons and things the second time through. So when you stick those stickers down, it'll cover up some words and it'll add some things, and so then you go back and read it again. It's something else, and now it's changed your perspective, and it's changed the way you think about those characters or that event. But it does it in kind of a permanent way. So the first time you read it, that'll be the only time you read it that way, if you follow the directions. So, and then I'm going to arrange it in a way where the stickers, you're not going to be able to just easily kind of anticipate what the words would do if you stuck them on there. You'll have to stick them on there to figure it out. Because I want you to permanently change it. So then all you'll have is that one time memory of the thing you read, and now it's always going to be a little bit different. Anyway, I just thought that would be kind of a fun thing to experiment with. And in a way, it's like I don't know. It's like we used to watch 2020 when I was in college, and they would always have a mystery, and like for half the show, they're like, "You're convinced the guy's guilty, right? He did it. Here's all the evidence." And then commercial break, you come back. The other half of the show is like, "Oh, well, here's all this other stuff and these other things," and you're like, "Oh, he didn't do it. That wasn't it at all," or whatever. Your perspective shifts, and then you can never get that first feeling back again.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of want to try to do a story where you kind of have that shift where you believe one thing and then you read it again and your perspective has changed. And I don't know. I think that's kind of a fun experiment in storytelling, just because I think, especially now, people are arguing about everything, and no one ever changes their mind about anything. I feel like your brain is set in this groove where you're going to believe this thing, and then no one ever admits they're wrong. And then I get into arguments with my brother all the time, and at this point I'm like, I'll never convince him. His mind will never change. But to me, that's always but I always find that I am reading a thing or listening to something, and I'm like, oh, that's, maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
About something. And so I want to create a sort of an experience where you're reading a thing, and then you have that feeling of like, oh, I thought this thing, and now I do think this other thing, or that weird feeling of like, well, I was wrong about that, or this thing is, and it sort of just shifts your point of view a little bit. But I don't know. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't. We'll see.
I love it. I mean, honestly, like that is amazing. I think that kind of ties into, I feel like to a certain degree, and this is just me as an outsider, it feels like to a certain degree between like this and like the mind management read along record that you did, it's almost like you're kind of like, one of the things that doesn't really happen a whole lot with comics is it's just like the reader is the reader, and like, that's just kind of how they engage. But it kind of seems like you're kind of playing with interactivity in comic book storytelling in some ways that is like a little bit different. I guess that kind of ties into the appeal of collaboration for you right now. It's almost like you're collaborating with the reader. Like they're an active participant in like the storytelling you're doing right now. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect way to say it. I wish I had thought to word it that way. But yeah, I do feel like I just want it to be more of an interaction between me and whoever's reading it, even though I'm not there. I kind of love that feeling. There's a book. Did you ever read the book House of Leaves?
Mm-mm.
It's a crazy book, and it's got a lot of weird design things, and then the way it's all prose, but then the way it's laid out is different. And I just remember being up late. This is probably 10 years ago, reading this book at night with my book light on it, and just being completely freaked out like by a thing he did in there where you think one thing and then you learn a thing about a character, and it actually scared me.
Right.
I was like, wow, I've never been scared by a book before. And so I love the idea of you read a thing and then maybe you're just a little paranoid, or you're like, what is going on? And it's just, yeah, I don't know.
No, I mean, I totally agree, because it seems like there's a lot of rigidity in the world when it's like, if anything we know, it's like everything about the world tells us we should definitely question things more, yet we don't really. I don't know. I mean, I think it's good to incorporate those types of things into it, because it's like maybe the people who read it will start wondering these things again. But
yeah.
Well, I'm going to close with two very random places to end it. I have a patron question and a question I want to ask you specifically about your Valiant work, just because I used to write this column for Multiversity Comics that was like looking at Valiant stuff, and I always got the impression, and like it was weird because I just found it kind of contrary to what my vision of you was, that you really love Ninjak. Am I am I wrong about that? I don't know why. It was this vibe I got.
Yeah. Did you what was the contrary? You thought I wouldn't like him?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense because you like spy stuff, and in Ninjak, besides the fact that he is like typically a more action oriented guy, is a spy. I mean, like one of my favorite scenes in the Valiant that you and Paulo and Jeff did was that scene where Paulo has like Ninjak is coming out of the snow and he's just buried by it.
I own that page. I literally own it. It's on my wall right
Oh my
now.
God. I think Paulo told me that because I had him on and I was talking to him about that page. And he's like, yeah, Matt loves that page too. That's why I bought it or something. And I was
Yeah,
just like,
the snow is on his sword, like the way here's the embarrassing thing about it is I saw the art come in. I was like, oh my God, Paulo, that like this, what a great idea of the sword on the snow on the sword, and it looks so great. And Paulo was like, he's like, dude, that was in the script. You described it exactly. I had just forgotten, but I think it's one thing to imagine it, and another thing to see somebody that can actually draw it.
yeah.
And it just looks so good.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, honestly, like I've touted the Valiant a lot because it's such a great introductory point to that whole universe. But the thing is normally when I talk about it, I'm just like, you should just really look at this one panel because it's really incredible how the snow is on the sword. And I don't know, I just love it because it says so much about the character in this situation just by what's on the sword because it's all resting like that. I don't know. It's just, yeah. I'm like a fanboy of that one panel.
Man, I'm so glad when this is over, if you have your screen on or whatever, I'll walk you over. You can look at it on my wall. It's literally hanging on my wall.
But I mean, so was I wrong about your Ninjak love, or is that like actually like a thing?
No, he's like the one character that's a spy, and I think the thing that is off-putting about him is his horrible name.
Right.
And then the purple and it's like but I think that's also what's kind of great. Like to me, what I was jealous of was like Grant Morrison, Neil Gaiman, those guys in the 90s, and Peter Milligan with Shade the Changing Man. They came in and they took all these super goofy DC characters that were never cool.
Right.
You know what I mean? They weren't ever cool. And they came in and they started writing like Doom Patrol and Shade the Changing Man and I was like, oh, they took something that like an existing idea and they kind of put a twist on it and they put it in a different context and they actually made it cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like that was a thing where by the time I got to Marvel and DC, I'm like, well, all the really bad characters have been taken up and made good now. So there's no like really cheesy character that you can like do that to. But with Valiant, I was like, oh, there's a few characters in there that you could do that with, and I think Ninjak was one, and Folklords was another one. I had an idea for that, but I never got to it. And
mm-hmm.
But there's a few where it was just like they're kind of goofy, but you could do something to make them really cool.
Yeah. Well, the last question is also involving Ninjak, but it comes from a patron. Some of you know, and he sends his love. It's Adam Freeman.
Yeah.
He, and I don't know anything about this, so like it's not even really a question. He just said, please ask him if he knows who the biggest Ninjak fan is.
He just wants me to tell the story I told.
That's exactly what he said. And I'm like,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So we were, I was on my way to New York for a convention, and I was on the panel, the Valiant panel, and then I don't know how it came up, and Dinesh, back when Dinesh was still there, he was like, the running joke was, me and Dinesh would always argue about who the biggest Ninjak fan, because he was a huge Ninjak fan, and when I started at the company, I always told him and Warren, my editor, I was like, if anybody's going to do Ninjak, you gotta let me do Ninjak. No one else can do it. That's mine. Like, because they hadn't launched him yet. And they're like, yeah. And then I think Unity had come out, and then I was busy on another book, and they were going to give it to Rob. And I told Warren, I was like, Warren, Rob can't write that book. That's Ninjak is my book. Like, I'm the biggest fan. And then Dinesh is like, I'm the biggest fan. But anyway, I was super busy, and Warren's like, you don't have the time to do it. And I was like, I will make time. I will have the time. And so I just, without them approving me, I just wrote like a pitch for like the first year. Ninjak with like all the story ideas, and I had an idea for the inside covers where I would draw his gadgets, and so then it ended up happening. But anyway, but there was always still the argument between me and Dinesh, who's the biggest Ninjak fan. So we were on the way to, and so I was on my way to New York for a Valley panel, and on the airplane. I got to back up. I totally messed up the story. Anyway, so in the 90s, there were metal rings made. They did an Exo metal ring, and they did a Ninjak metal ring. And I knew about the Exo metal ring because my brother had one. I had no idea there was a Ninjak metal ring. It must have been like a special order thing or something. Anyway, I saw that Dinesh had one, and I was like, where did you get that from? Like, I want one of those so bad. I had no idea. And then, so then in the mail, one showed up. Like, he bought one off eBay and sent it to me, my Ninjak ring. And so I was like, well, I'm totally going to wear it. So New York Comic Con, I got on the plane, had my Ninjak ring on, I had my Ninjak tennis shoes, like that were like hand painted. And then I'm wearing my Ninjak ring, super proud. And I get on the airplane, get off, land in New York. When I get off the plane, I was like, I gotta go to the bathroom so bad. So I'm in the urinal, going to the bathroom. And the problem with the Ninjak ring is it's just like a generic one size thing, and it's kind of loose. So I'm going to the bathroom, and then the ring falls off into the urinal, and that's the day that I realized that I am the biggest Ninjak fan. And then I was on the panel, and I told the story, and I hold up, and I have my Ninjak ring on and everything. So that would be the truth of who's the biggest fan.
You proved it through a trial of fire.
Yeah. So, and I still have that ring. It's in my bag everywhere I go.
That is amazing. Well, take that, Dinesh.
Yeah.
But Matt, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about, your career, your Folklords, Matt Smith's greatness, and your Ninjak ring, everything else. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with cartoonist Matt Kindt. You can find Kindt on Twitter at Matt Kindt, on his website at mattkindtshop.com, and his writing in the upcoming Folklords at Boom Studios. As a heads up, Off Panel is once again brought to you by Sketch.com. Check out the new version of the site and consider subscribing for access to all of the site's content and its members-only forum. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to weekly content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on iTunes or Spotify and give the show a rating and review while you're at it. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking on Facebook at /Sketched, that's SKTCHD, following on Twitter at @SketchComic, or following me at @SlicedFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Paul Salates, Litwin Studios, Akil Wilson, Andrew Nikovich, Nathan House, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Troy Jeffrey Allen, Liana Kingus, Keegan Ray, Milton Lawson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Harry Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Ryanwan, Connor Farner, Vita Ayala, JDC and Matt Gagnon, Aditya Bidikar, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, Kieran Mark Antonio, WMQ Comics, Akil, Kokachi, Phil White, Ben Becker, Sean Pinnell, Kent Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Assey, Adam Bogert, Xavier Files, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Braldy, Ira James Udaskin, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Greg Rucka, Adam Highfield, Nicholas Gardner, Fiona Staples, Chris Hallren, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DeMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.